spring labor struggle or labor management negotiation used to be the opportunity for representatives of labor and management to assert their positions. So results of negotiations had a huge influence on a society and the economy. However, it has changed. Why is that?
Yes, interesting thing is that in every recent spring negotiations, we hear the debate over the division of spring negotiation itself. And I think there are two reasons for that. One is that we no longer be able to expect such higher wage hike as before. For example, in the high growth era, in the 1960s to the early 1970s, there has been 2 digits wage hike. I mean, like 10 to 20% wage hike in every year. And even after the oil crisis in the mid-1970s, it continued to be around 5% or so every year up to the corruption of the bubble economy in the early 1990s. But as you know, it became now under just 2% or so, and it is quite reasonable that both employers and union members start doubting, is it really necessary for us to consume such large energy to make just 1 to 2% of wage hike every year? The second reason is the fact that the wage level of each workers became determined more individually by their abilities or performances. Recently, more and more number of companies introduce so-called the merit-based wage system, and there is more variance among workers' wage level depending on their performances or abilities. Then, for example, you have one high performer who can get 4% wage hike in this year, and you have the other low performer who got only 0 wage hike. And so, as algebraic average, you just have a 2% wage hike, which in fact no one receives in your company. So I mean that for each union members, an average wage hike has become less meaningful. And in this respect, the meanings of the spring negotiation that determine the average wage hike becomes weakening. Therefore, the revision of the spring negotiation seems to be unavoidable.
What's the reason for that?
Yes, one reason why the wage hike becomes so low is, of course, the recent stagnant economy, but there is more structural reason to reduce wage hike. That is the fact that the wage level of Japanese workers themselves is now one of the highest one in the dollar term internationally. I mean, you cannot increase wages that are already high enough in the world market. The tendency towards the merit-based wages also came from the economic status that Japan has achieved. A well-developed economy like Japan has to survive in a qualitative competition rather than quantitative competition. And in this competition, you need more talented people who can create the values. Wages became more valid depending on each worker's ability to create values.
So spring labor struggle or labor management negotiation that focuses on labor to force the unified demands upon management has lost its function. Is that right?
No, not necessarily. Even if wages became determined by individually, and one individual worker cannot negotiate with employers on the rules that determine the individual wages. There is a huge gap on the bargaining position and the information between workers and employers. So, by what criteria determine your ability or performances, and what kind of grievance procedure when you have a complaint about the evaluation that your employer made on your ability or performance. So unions that usually have more equal bargaining power have to make such rules with employers, and they also have to monitor these rules. And such opportunity as spring negotiations can be used as an useful platform on which unions and employers negotiate, revise, and monitor these rules that determine each worker's labor conditions every year.
Finally, Professor Seike, in order to make the spring labor struggle or labor management negotiation meaningful and bring the recovery of the Japanese economy, which task do labor and management have to tackle before anything else? Please share with us your opinion and request.
Yes, for example, to cope with the aging population, such matters like public pension reforms would be important agenda that should be discussed in the spring negotiations. And as you know, many unions this year raised such agenda like the extension of retirement age due to the lift of pension eligible age. And that is a very important, I think, agenda to discuss in this spring negotiation. And this is one example, though. The nature of employment is now being changed by structural changes of the whole economy. So it is very important, therefore, unions and employers discuss on the adequate way of changing the employment system as smooth as possible with the minimum problem, trouble, or struggle of workers. I think hereafter, the spring negotiations should seek not only the result like the average wage hike, but also the adequate due process like the adequate rules that determine the individual wages. It would also provide useful platform in which you can discuss on the reforms of the employment system to cope with the changing economic circumstances. So in these ways, I think that the spring negotiation is not necessarily be diminished, but be revised or redesigned to cope with new circumstances.
Professor Seike, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
That was Professor Atsushi Seike of Keio University, interviewed by Mihoko Honda on Shunto, or the Spring Labor and Management Negotiations.